Hello and welcome back to Media Convention Berlin 2019 to the second presentations or talks that we will have today. For our German-speaking attendees, you can get translating devices at the back of the room. Now, there will be three gentlemen talking about virtual reality. Worldwide, the interest in VR is increasing steadily, whilst the great VR film breakthrough is yet to happen. With Facebook and YouTube supporting 360-degree videos, it's only a matter of time until VR will be mainstream. Industry pioneers, such as the gentleman that will be on stage with me shortly, are therefore already engaging with virtual projects and their challenges with storytelling. They will each hold a presentation, and afterwards there will be 5 minutes time for Q&A. Our first speaker is Sven Bliedung, who is the CEO at Volumetric, which is the first volumetric capture studio in mainland Europe. He's also the founder of the Virtual Reality Association Berlin-Brandenburg, and his credits include amazing projects such as The Raven, Marvel's The Avengers, and Cloud Atlas. Please welcome with me Sven Bliedung.
Okay, hello. Great to see you all. Can we put my slides onto the screens perfectly? Thanks for the great introduction. So I can skip this part already. We can save a bit of time. And just to give you an overview what we have created at the studio environment in Babelsberg, I like to show you a short teaser of the whole project. So that's the location, actually, and let me introduce the people or the companies behind this whole project. So it's based on 5 big shareholders of the company. It's Ari, who are very famous for their whole light and camera systems, and we have the Fraunhofer Institute, which have created a lot of the whole software behind it and the whole algorithms parts. Then we have Interlake as a cloud processing provider. We have Studio Babelsberg as a shareholder, which is really interesting for us because we can utilize their whole production pipeline in terms of film and cinematic productions. And then we have the UFA in our team, actually, who are really focusing on how to tell immersive stories in the future. And all those people are really like the big brains in Germany in terms of volumetric content, and we came together and created the studio. And actually, we are not just a production studio, but then also we are an innovation cluster, which means we give a lot of interviews currently for a lot of magazines, writing articles, a lot of TV shows, and appearing on a lot of stages, because for us it's really important that people understand what is volumetric capture, what's the difference between it, what is new about it, and how can I utilize it for my own productions. And therefore, we also work quite close together with the DE Hub initiative. If you haven't heard about it, it's in Germany we have a lot of different clusters which focusing on several topics, and Brandenburg is actually the area for MediaTech. Officially from the government. And we're not only focusing on the German area, but also around the whole globe, actually. So we meet up with all, I would say, competitors in the market, like Intel Studios, which have a really big space where you can capture like 50 people at the same time with a, I would say, a bit lower quality, but for really big masses. Then we are doing cooperations with Microsoft, which are really good in this area. 8i is one of the big players as well in America. And then, of course, companies who are interested into sound and spatial audio, like Sennheiser, are also quite advanced. And we're building currently a big network of all these companies together. And the crazy thing about this whole volumetric thing is as more as I thought about is when you look back into the time how everything really started with terms of how to create movies, we are basically really at the first step. So this was actually one of the first, I would say, theaters or cinemas where you could see moving images. And when people tell me about virtual reality and it's still like an isolated situation, it will not happen. You just look at the first early days, how you could watch moving images, and it was the same kind of experience. You have these kind of boxes, you can look inside of it, and then you see the moving content, and you have these little boxes. And if you compare it with nowadays, like VR launched in Berlin, you have the same situation. You have this, like, everyone has this little device on his head. You have these kind of boxes where you have to get into. So it's kind of similar, and the same applies for storytelling. If you imagine in the early years of the movie industry, it took really a long time until we got to this point we have nowadays in terms of storytelling for movies. And in the beginning, it was just that people looked at the theatrical pieces and tried to create those ideas from there and overtake it into their productions. And what we see nowadays with VR is the same approach. You have people from the movie industry who try to tell movie stories in VR, and then you have these game-based companies who try to tell their game stories. But everything is just based on these old kind of two-dimensional experiences which we got used to, and there's not a real kind of storytelling for VR there. And one big issue with it is actually that to create content and good story for it, you need to capture those people in a volumetrically way that you are able to walk around them and see them from all angles. And this is something which was very, very hard to achieve. And what we see nowadays actually is that we get more and more devices coming out which are more smaller and more convenient to wear, and we are seeing more and more use cases for it. And this also raises the question for storytelling, for which audience you really create your content to. Because if it's running in a, I would say, roller coaster arcade environment, it's a complete different content than if you would create content for people who watch it at home or people who see it in different locations. So it's really like depending on where you will show it. Here's just one example, of course, from how current productions are done, for example, from Avengers, where I see some kind of limitations in terms of what we have in current movie productions, that when you film with green screen, for example, you always have a fixed angle and you have really carefully planned for everything. So the final shot has to look exactly nearly as the screen captured material. So all the light and everything has to be very well prepared to make it look like or work in the end. And the opposite, or the new way, what we have now with volumetric captures, actually we can scan those characters and can get out three-dimensional avatars of them, which are looking very natural. So this is just one example, one person we scanned, and this is what you get out. But the thing is, same like in the movie industry, when it all started in the beginning, you had this kind of photographs where you have just a still picture, and then it evolves to moving images. What we did in the past already is like creating still images of people, but nowadays it's possible to make it really like a moving and animation experience. And then you also have to ask yourself, okay, where do you place those characters? This is just a short example of the HoloLens 2, for example, where we tried some of these avatars out. And there you see, for example, one of the volumetric characters next to a, I would say, normal 3D asset character you can buy online. And you have to ask yourself, if you tell stories in a, for example, augmented reality space where people can interact in your home space with you, what kind of stories can you tell and how should you tell them that they're really immersing the audience? And as you can imagine, it's not so easy. When you think about it, you can even place those persons. This is done with just an iPad. You can scale them up into every kind of position and sizes, and you can imagine there are a lot of new ways of telling stories out there which still haven't been discovered yet. And if you look back, I mean, I think all of you know these kind of game companies who create all these kind of avatars, but they're all working in a complete different area. So normally when you want to have a people or a person like me in a kind of 3D environment, you would have to create like an outside body out of it, and then you have to put a lot of joints inside of it to animate it. You can imagine if I would be a sculpture and you would like to move my hand, you need to place a joint inside the hand, and then you can start moving the hand and then the fingers. But it gets really, really complex when you just look at the face, how many muscles you have and how to make the animations right. And this is really a big challenge, because if you try to apply all these disciplines, you have a lot of uncreative workflows and pipelines you have to overcome as a creative producer, which is really a bummer at this point. And this is just for one character, the pipeline actually, to create a character in a non-linear way. So you can see it gets really, really fast messed up. And this is something where a lot of people don't use human avatars so much anywhere, because you have to put a lot of effort and a lot of money into it to make it right. And it's till the very last details, it still look very, I would say, uncanny valley, and it gets really, really hard to overcome this issue. And the opposite in doing it this way is actually to do a complete volumetric scan for every frame of the person. And this is what the Volumetric Capture Studio is about. So what you see here is actually not a spaceship, that's the inside of our capture area. And we have 32 cameras, and we have light from all areas. So we have about 250 sky panels, which lit up the character. We have lit up floor, and we can control all those lights from all directions. Here you get a bit more perspective. So if a person stands in the middle, we have about 3 meters of radius where diameter where you can walk inside. And the very good thing about it is we don't need any motion capture suits or any green screen. You can just walk in there like you are. You can do the performance. And the producer itself just sits outside, and he has a 2-meter screen where you can see the person already nearly as in real size. So you already have the feeling as if you would have a VR headset on or an augmented reality device, and you place a character in front of you, and then you can directly tell the actor, okay, please do this or please do that, and you can directly interact with the actor while you're recording. And this is completely new, because in the old way, when you remember the diagram from before, it was a very long way until you get the final animation and you see the final outcome. And here you can directly interact with the actor and directly work creatively with the actors. And this is a really big game changer. Just to show you something, this is how the studio looks like. Here we did, for example, shooting with a fashion designer, Lana Müller, because it's also a big topic, of course, for a fashion designer to be available for augmented reality. Just if you imagine you have a fashion show at your home, and the designer walked down your kitchen or where you want it, or if you imagine, let's say, George Clooney staying there at your home presenting some kind of new stuff as a virtual avatar, there are a lot of new possibilities. And even the idea of actors getting old during long series or so is just a creative decision in the future, because we can keep them as young as we want. And that's basically also our goal. So what you see here is then the 3D model of the capture of her. So as you can see, there's still, let's say, a little bit of artifacts you see, which we're working on, but you still see this is what you get directly raw out of the system without any post-production. And this is the output, and it looks very, I would say, natural, and it overcomes this uncanny valley issue. And yeah, I already mentioned, so for the dynamic light, we are completely able to reproduce any light situation, which is very important for us, because in this way we can control everything inside of it very well. And this is done through the knowledge of Ari, which have created a complete system for us, which is very unique. But we can also film, if you don't know the final outcome of it or the final environment, we can just capture in a kind of very diffuse light situation. And then we are able to create those light situations later on. So here you see an example. The person on the right image, on the left side, is actually the original light situation we got there, and then we reintegrated the light of the later capture back onto the character. And then you see you get this kind of morning feeling for him, because he's there and yeah, show you some cool moves. Here you see actually what it's looked like for a computer. So what you see here is basically the texture of such a person. So it's a kind of person very, very flat as a 2D image on the ground. And if you would imagine you have all these little pieces and you would wrap them together in a kind of geometrically right way, you would get out the 3D character of it. And this is how the humans, after the scanning, basically look like. And what you see on the left is basically here also the original material, and on the right side then with the new light baked in later. So we are very flexible in these terms. And yeah, volume cap itself, I mean, I think I explained quite a lot. What is important to mention is if you look at it from a cost perspective, because this question comes always like, oh my God, how much does it cost? Because it's really a big system. We are about a third of the prices for creating a character in a normal game dev environment. So If you're planning for a shooting, for example, and you have, like, let's say, a character talking about 3 minutes about something, you will end up about 20,000 euros, something like this. So it's something which is, if you work normally with game dev environments and normal character creation, it's way lower than it normally is, with a very high quality and very natural looking. Yeah, so that's basically the whole studio. For the camera itself, we capture with an ultra high resolution, so all the cameras are very specific. They have like glass fiber channel, and every 5 minutes we capture the volume of all the books on the whole planet. So just to give you an idea of how much data is recorded there at the stage. And the important thing is there that normally when you do a capture there or you film there, you don't get anything of it to see. You just go there, you do the production, and all the technical parts, you can walk with with a normal camera. You can say start, stop as much as you like, and we do all the captures. We can even film 90 minutes in one piece if you want to, but it gets to to a lot of data. And this one point of the discovery what we made is actually, it's really good that we started actually last year with this whole project, because the whole hardware we needed for this approach wasn't there before this point. So if we have started just 2 months earlier, we would be only able to capture 2 minutes in one piece, but not 90 minutes. And there you see also the hardware is developing very fast. And nowadays we already start looking into how to make the system smaller, mobile, to bring it to other locations and stuff like this. So it's really looking forward where the future is leading us. Yeah, and for the studio itself, if you step a bit further away and you take the fabric on top, you see that we have a rail on the ground where we can actually open up the studio itself. So it's a kind of very modular system, because in this way it allows us to bring us stuff like treadmills or other bigger objects, which we sometimes need for capturing. Because we have just 3 meters, we need to be kind of clever in terms of planning shots with longer takes. And here see just a small picture. Last November we started with our commercial productions, and this is just a few of the characters and actors we have already scanned in our location. So it's really ranging from all directions, like medieval stuff to fashion designer to sci-fi. So it's really amazing to see with all the ideas the people came up with. And what we focus on us is actually to enable all these creative minds out there to use the technology and to find actually good ways to express themselves. And here just some of the captures we did. So these are now not video material, these are now 3D objects actually with the textures. And as you see, they already start looking very real. Of course, there are some limitations, so if you get really close to them, because in VR you can walk very close to them, after a certain point they get, I would say, a bit more blurry, because resolution-wise you can't really put all the details in. But we're also focusing on this thing, or on this topic. So here, for example, you see some tests with kind of higher resolution captures of facial areas. So these are like R&D stuff you do currently to get really close to faces. If you have if you want to create a very emotional connection, at some point you have to ask yourself if you really want it this close. Yeah, but this is basically the whole idea behind it, that we push the limits which are currently on the market and try to see what is the best possible way to bring creative people together with the technology and play around with them. And if you try to start imagine in the art direction, for example, what is possible with all this data, because you don't need to use them as a real human. You have a 3D body with everything. You could also go very stylistic, like fading them into particles or making weird glowing movements or whatever. So you can be very creative, and there are a lot of spaces which nobody really has looked into it yet. And this makes it really important for us to try to encourage creative people to use it and to try out their stories, because otherwise we will not learn actually what kind of storytelling will really work in VR if we don't try all these kind of weird ideas. Okay, that's basically a short overview about the Volumetric Studio. Yeah, further questions? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sven Bliedung.
Yeah.
Now we have time for a Q&A, so we have people walking around with microphones, I think. Yes? And Sven Bliedung taking a 360-degree video. Photo, sorry. You're on, smile.
Perfect, thank you.
So yeah, are there any questions? I think 5th row, this. microphone, yeah, there.
Hey, just to check. Okay, good. So the presentation was very clear. Thank you so much for everything. My question is more like, from the side of the consumer, when are people going to wear these devices? Because we look at something like the Google glasses and people don't really want to wear it. So when we're going to see a situation where this could really be used like mass?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you look at the American market, they overhype this topic totally. I mean, they're really good in selling and marketing, but it depends on the market. The American market has really like this really big hype, so they have a lot of expectations for these devices, but the devices are, at the current state, I mean, I've tested a lot of prototypes and they're now getting into this area where I can imagine, I mean, the newer devices like, for example, a portable device like Lenovo Mirage, so they're now at the price point of about 300 or 400 bucks. And you don't need any computer for it or anything. You just take it on and you can walk around. And this is really cool because this enables us to really do fast and quick demonstrations, try it out, and you're not limited to these kind of heavy computer environments where you need a computer and then those glasses for €1,000 and so on. So what they now try to focus on is more like getting it lighter and even more comfortable. But what I found interesting in this whole development is actually that in the beginning, everyone thought that everyone would have those devices quite early at home, and this doesn't happen. We see now more and more people using those devices at home, but a really big market came up with all the location-based experiences. And this is something which really went very good, where you have a fixed location, where you have the latest devices. People can go there with groups that can experience something. And if you go there in America or places, I mean, in Berlin, we have this Exit VR, for example, they're really overbooked, and a lot of people are standing there and want to try it. Because you see, it makes sense, because you don't need to own a headset which loses the value after a few months already. And you can just go there with friends and try it out. And those experiences are really good in the market already.
Thank you. Any more questions?
No?
Okay, so then I have a question.
Okay.
You've already mentioned Uncanny Valley, which we've talked about before. Could you explain to our audience what the Uncanny Valley is?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is if you have something to show, but the point is, especially our brain is so specific, and to see the difference in human actors, just imagine when you go down a street and you see a group of people and just a friend is in this group. Even if it's a group of people far away, you directly see, oh, this guy I know, and you go to him and you talk to him. So our brain is so actually good into determine the whole everything, like little movements, like facial expressions. And especially when you separate the animation from the creation of the body. What's doing, like if you watch Blade Runner or the latest Star Wars movies, there are hundreds of people working just on 6 seconds where people appear in the movie as a digital double, but you still see that something is weird with them. And the problem with it is it's always like you have this body and then you have hundreds of people animating this body, and our brain is so good that you can't really tell what is the difference, what you need to do better, because it's so subconscious in us. But if it's not there, you see it, and it feels kind of weird. And this is something what we overcome in this way, because we directly capturing the whole animation with the textures and everything with this 3D object. And yeah, this is basically the Uncanny Valley. So it's the degree of quality you need to achieve until a person looks real for yourself.
I don't know if you all have seen Polar Express. This is for me the biggest example of Uncanny Valley when I look at Tom Hanks in Polar Express. Yeah. What did they do wrong?
Especially if you have people which you already know, then it's really hard. Because if you have a famous people and you know them and you see them, you directly can associate and you know how they look in real life. And then your brain starts to comparing this virtual character with the real one, and then it feels often very, very awkward. And the idea is more like, on one point, I mean, Disney and so, they try to get more into the other direction to make it more stylistic and more expressionless. So you see that's still an actor moving them, but it's not obvious that they try to duplicate this actor. Yeah. I think this is a big issue when you duplicate those. And they're all animated by hand there as well. I mean, it's an animation movie, so they're not volumetrically captured.
Okay, so I think we had another question in the front row. No, second row, sorry.
Hi. So my name is Naomi. I'm working in a game development company. I had a following question. You think it's a matter of time that people will be able to create, like it will be coded, all the movements and everything of the characters, and then you'll be just customizing everything for the proper characters, for example, and it could be not only for the game but also for the movies or for other usage as well.
I mean, companies like Facebook, for example, already were working on this. So they try to actually, I mean, there's something called FACS. It's a facial expression catalog, what is used nowadays. So you have the main expressions of a human face, and then you try to blend between them. But in this blending, you lose a lot of these details. But nowadays, I think the big idea behind this is because we have now this very high-res captures of these humans, we can fed them into artificial intelligence systems, so they can learn actually how the shape should behave and also how the actors behave. And then you will come up with very weird solutions because, or questions like who's responsible for the actor's performance, who owns the rights of it, and if you mix, for example, Brad Pitt with George Clooney, you can do all kind of crazy stuff. Who's actually in charge of such projects? And this is something which will happen and will be possible in the near future. And I mean, we're already also looking into artificial intelligence to enhance our performances. But currently it's a linear thing because currently we just do the capture and then it gets playback as we captured it. But we are already able to move the head, for example, of the characters. So little adjustments, or if you do already a movement, you can make it stronger or slower. For example, if you turn the car or something, you can exaggerate the movement a bit more or less. But the problem is currently because all the wrinkles of the cloth and so everything is basically in the character. You can't really go away from the original capture too far. But this is something, I think this will be solved in the next years, and then it will be also very interesting. I mean, Studio Babelsberg is of course also interested into looking in telling bigger stories with less budget, basically, to have like populate whole areas and places with a lot of people who are interacting with each other, and you don't need to get the whole cast there, because then you have 100 pirates, 100 lawyers, and you just place them there and they do their thing. And this is something where it will go in this direction, yeah.
Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you, Sven Bliedung. Thank you. So, coming from a fictive story, we are going now to something more, I would say personal and private. We have Karim Ben Khelifa. He is, or he has been, a war correspondent and photojournalist in numerous war zones, and he is a member of the advisory board of the Observatory for Photojournalism, oh my god, so many big words, of the French Ministry of Culture and Communication. He has a big project with it, which is amazing. It's called The Enemy. It's being shown, and it has been shown, at the 19th Annual War Correspondents Gathering at Bayeux. And the very, very great project brings you face to face with combatants from 3 different war zones, so one can understand the different points of views of what's going on in war. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and perhaps if we could launch the video, it would contract a lot of what I need to tell you and help you getting into the work. Thank you. I've been a war correspondent and photojournalist for about 18 years. You go into some of the darkest places in this world with a strong motivation to give a voice to those people and have an impact. But I realized along the way the situation is not changing, so there's only 2 roads. Either you quit or you rethink. We need to experiment with journalism, taking new mediums and new platforms, because otherwise we'll be irrelevant very quickly. So how can new technologies transform the way we experience news? First time I tried VR, I felt the power of the medium, and I just wonder what's going to happen to journalism if those guys come out of the photographs, if they are in the room with us. Is it possible? The aim of The Enemy is to bring 2 individuals that have been trained to kill each other and allow people to realize that the humanity of those people on both sides is exactly the same. Not through a story, through an experience. Young people are growing up, and they're going to have a choice to take a weapon or not. So this is exactly my target audience. The people who can have an impact.
זה קריף אותי. אתה מסתכל אבו חייל בעיניים, אתה לא יכול באמת להגיד שהוא האויב שלך. בשביל החירות שלו, כמו שאתה אומר לך, בשביל זה.
The DNI decided to support the enemy at the point where we had all the contents, but we needed to deploy that. That has made the work alive. Perhaps in the future, if more of those things are created, you'll have audience that care more, you have audience that are more engaged, and eventually this is something that will trickle down to a societal effect. And this is what journalism is supposed to be. Thank you very much. So let's be clear, Google was one of the supporters of the work, but first of all, there was the production company in Paris, the National Film Board in Canada, and numerous foundations to help push journalism into a new dimension. What is the genesis of the project? And if there is some storyteller in the room, I ask you to think about your frustration. And this is what drove me to do this. I'm struggling to do an update with my Mac, so technology is really not my thing. But what I was interested when I discovered VR, it was really to put those persons that I meet and that I have met in different conflict zones and enemies from each other, in order for us to meet them and to understand who they are, and most importantly, how similar they are, even though they are enemy. And for this, VR seemed to be the good medium when I discovered it, but I tried VR and discovered VR in 2013 when I was a fellow at MIT, and it was a small company that came and showed us their hardware. It was Oculus, and that was before they were bought by Facebook, and VR was starting to be big. It was very, very, very important for me to be as true as possible. I come from a journalism background, so it's the people you're meeting, you're also meeting them with their body language. There was no way for me that I could interpret some numbers of things within this. This is who they are, and really your brain process not only what they told you, and they're looking at you and they're following your eyes, but also the body language. We use that form of communication every day to make sense of the world around us and make sense of the people. So how did we do that? Well, at the start, people says like, how are you going to meet those fighters? But as a war correspondent, that was the easy part. And there was a lot of people with guns, and I've been covering wars for about 15 years, so this was the easy part to access. And we started in Israel and Palestine, so I went to Gaza. And we couldn't do what Volumetric did, because to start with, the technology wasn't there in 2014, but also I couldn't bring such technology within Gaza, or the same in Salvador, or the same in Congo. So we had to create something much more portable, and I like to see this as some form of hacking. Same with the Oculus, the experience, the VR experience is an in-room VR. It's 300 meters square, it's a bit smaller than this room, and you walk. And you're left in between two fighters at some point, and you need to meet them, and you need to work with them. And this is where journalism is really becoming extremely interesting, because usually we passively consume journalism. And think about it, you turn your radio in the car or in the kitchen, you turn your TV on, watch a documentary or the news, you open the newspaper when you can actually read it, or the magazine, so you have the time, and you actively going for it. But once you have it, it's passive. There, in this 300-meter square, you need to walk. And you're walking closer to people you would never meet in your life. So there is an emotional aspect in this, and also very much a behavioral aspect in how you react to this. One component of the enemy is, when I was at MIT, and I've developed that with the center, the Imagination, Computation, and Expression Lab, which look at behavior in people. And the only information we have about the user when he's in the system is the way he's reacting. If you're nodding and you nod at some point, the system notes that. And in front of those 6 fighters, you stop noting there is a change of behavior. The distance you have with each of them. Are you looking at them in the eyes? Or one of the two, you didn't look at them. So we can track some form of nervosity that the users can express while he's in the system. And therefore, the system is changing along the way. So it's trying to bring also, in that aspect, journalism a bit further. What was the impact of the enemy? Because you heard, I'm after impact. I think there is 2 kinds of journalism. There is the one who wants to inform you, and there is the one who wants to inform you and have an impact. As a war correspondent, it's obviously extremely hard to have an impact. Nevertheless, that's something I wanted to do. And for this, I've discovered VR, but my way of thinking, as a photojournalist, I had my medium, and I worked for large magazines, and so I had the second medium, the distribution, and then I had the audiences. And looking at how I was not impactful, I started thinking differently. And for me now, it's, what is your project? Who should see that project in order to have an impact? Who should be informed by your journalism? And then only at that point, which medium would be most adequate for that audience? So I'm changing a bit the order. I'm a freelance. I have the freedom to do this kind of things. It's harder if you work in an institution. But obviously, it's another way for me to choose a primary target audience. And in this case, you saw an example in the movie. We went to Israel. And we did something that is absolutely impossible in the country. It's having young Israeli walking towards a Palestinian fighter and listening to him. And those are the people who are going to need to make a choice. Am I going to fight? Am I going to participate in this? I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying reconsider the humanity of the other is way closer than we thought it is. And in order to kill at war, you need to dehumanize. My process in this is some form of rehumanization. I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong. I'm just proposing a meeting with the person that is impossible to meet. So that is if you involve within that conflict. And I'm assuming most of this audience doesn't really have an enemy. And it's still extremely interesting. Not only we live in a society that is getting more and more and more divided, and you walk in this and you see 2 combatants. And you're listening to them, and the question that I'm asking on both sides are similar questions. And based on their answer, you can step back and realize they're very similar. This was my experience on the ground. But working for magazines and photographing, I was not able to translate this reality. And therefore, it's interesting for audience like here to discover this and says, wow, those people are supposed to kill each other, but in basic humanities, they are exactly the same. So it's opening a bit the minds and realizing there is definitely different kind of people out there. Another impact, we're talking about VR, but in the title there was also AR. So this work was really thought to be a VR experience from A to Z. That's where I put my brain. But then AR came along the way because it was a 4-year production. And we decided to create an app with the National Film Board in Canada. This has allowed the work to be distributed in 107 countries. And I think this is one of the things that's really interesting with AR. Everyone here has a phone, and I believe 90% of this audience have phones with AR capacities. So thinking about the future, and to answer one of the questions, when is the penetration of the VR headsets going to be really good that it's actually reaching the people? But it could already in AR right now. So now there is other rules to do AR than we do with VR. As a matter of fact, my next project is not in VR, will be in AR, and I hope you'll have a chance to experience it, but we're not there yet. I don't know how much time do I have? Someone can make me a sign? I'm trying to see, no sign? I'm good, I'm assuming I have another half an hour. No? Not so much time, okay. So, as a journalist, my role was to transmit an information. And when I did The Enemy, it was an accident. I mean, it's not like I was planning to become a VR director or anything like this. I'm still 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to rush this. But I'm giving information. I'm trying to pass information, and I've taken quite some risk to do so. What I discovered with The Enemy, and maybe I take out for you, we make sense of the world through stories. And this starts when we are kids. The bad, the good, the forest, the wolf, whatever. And we make sense of the world every day through stories. The enemy, because you walk, because it's 300 meters square, because you meet people, you can fully be yourself. At some points, I believe you even forget you're in VR. I'm not bringing you in extraordinary place. I'm bringing you extraordinary people. In the enemy, it becomes an experience. And that's how my audience was speaking about it. So I'm asking a question and I don't have the answer, but I think collectively we can think about it. So we make sense of the world through stories, but we remember it through experience. And sometimes the stories we've been given are opposed to the experience we have of the world, and this is how we move and we change our opinion. My question is, what is going to become of journalism when journalism becomes an experience? And again, I don't have the answer. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, we are very short with time, so we only have time for one question.
One.
Are there any questions? Oh, the pressure. The pressure's so high. Okay, so I have one question.
Okay.
I've been back from Syria since 2 days, and I've seen people who are willing to go to war for their countries, and it hurt me so much. And I want to know, making this experience, what did it do to you?
Well, it's a long circle. I think when you go to war, you go for different reasons. When you decide to become a war correspondent, there's multiple reasons. There is not one reason for one. Some are personal, some are more holistic to some extent. But what it did brought to me is actually, it took about 18 years to do this. I was going out to war to understand why people are killing each other, not understanding why. I mean, I understand the geopolitics, I understand the storytelling, but the act of killing was something that was really hard for me to comprehend. And to some extent, the enemy is, I could say, I'm not a war correspondent anymore because I've done what I wanted to do and talking about war, but it takes a long time. So it's a long circle. Life is often a long circle, but this one was a pretty long one, a pretty formative one too. So I'm back at case zero and I'm tackling other subjects and other issues in this world related to war, but not so directly.
Thank you very much, Karim and Khelifa. Now coming on stage is Sebastian Sylwan, who is a visual effects and digital media technology executive. He is currently developing live-action virtual reality experiences and the cameras and tools to produce them. He is renowned for films such as King Kong and The Hobbit. He's CTO and creative partner of Felix and Paul Studios, a cinematic virtual reality startup known for having produced the highest quality experiences to date, including Jurassic World, Apatosaurus, Miyubi, Inside the Box of Curious, and The People's House, Inside the White House with Barack and Michelle Obama. Please welcome with me Sebastian Sylwan.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. I guess my name is Sebastian Sylwan. I'm the CTO and creative partner, and that, Karim, was a very tough act to follow. But I am very glad that that is a tough act to follow, because we do, at the studio, at Felix and Paul Studios, we do believe that there is a good future for immersive entertainment, and that good future needs to be forged. So this is exactly why we call ourselves, or we believe, that we have to be responsible in being rooted to the human experience. So we are a small studio in Montreal. We were born about 5 years ago. But we want to harness the power of presence that VR can elicit. And we want to do that. Take that immersion, that transporting the audience into another environment, to connect those people with stories. And so what we try to do is to create experiences that are VR native, that are thought of for VR, and that are at the core, transportative and potentially transformative. We do think that we will live in an immersive world. There was a question earlier about when we will see widespread use of VR headsets. Probably not until they still are clunky as they are today. But whatever the number of years, I am strongly convinced that we will see eventually all of the information around us be digital and immersive. And entertainment is only a part of that. So eventually entertainment will evolve to actually reach that immersiveness. And it will be part of a spectrum of immersion. The ethos of the studio is that we want to be at the bleeding edge of the exploration of the new language. We do believe that these are new media and that they need to be treated with the respect that a new medium respects, the new medium deserves. So I have a personal pet peeve that I'm going to take 30 seconds to describe. I cannot see any of you because these lights are very strong, but I will not ask you to raise your hands, but I would bet that most of you have a television set at home. I hope you're raising your hands or that saying yes in your minds. The fact that that television is being used to watch movies, probably watch the news, play video games if you have kids or if you're a gamer yourself, talk via Skype with your remote grandparents if you've moved away, does not mean, the fact that all those media share the same delivery device does not mean that all those media are the same. So why would we call all of those media applied to a different delivery device, a headset, to be the same medium? It is not all VR, or VR is the environment or the way you experience certain things that actually doesn't take into consideration what the content is. And we need to treat the content differently and develop the various languages for all those media in that delivery device. To do that, what we are centered on stories. And the way we consider ourselves is that because we are in the very early stages of the definition of a medium, we think of ourselves as a full spectrum studio. What that means is that we go from the ideation of the story all the way to the delivery, the marketing even, and the distribution of the stories. We have started essentially at the very beginning of telling cinematic stories in the medium of VR. The very first film that we believe ever made in virtual reality was Strangers with Patrick Watson. And this was something that we brought. It was an experimental film shot with a camera, an individual shot, just being with an artist in a studio. It was just during his creative process and sharing that process with him. And it was incredibly transportative. And we brought this to Oculus at South by Southwest in 2013. And on the spot, Oculus decided, up to that point, they had thought that VR was all for games. And they decided to switch half of their booth at South by Southwest itself and to put this experience onto the headsets. Immediately after, they asked us to do introduction to virtual reality. As they went through, that led to a collaboration with Cirque du Soleil, for which we have done 5, although one is very experimental and early on. And that led us, and I'm skipping very quickly through the history of the studio because I don't think that's not the core of the presentation. That led to doing 2 successive work with Jurassic World Apatosaurus, and then successively with Jurassic World Blue that was released last year. These 2 experiences have consistently for the past 5 years been Jurassic World Apatosaurus for 3 years, the most viewed experience on the store, and now supplanted by Jurassic World Blue that we released. This led us to explore, and this was really the path, led us to explore a little bit more of what it meant to do narratives in VR. And in Miyubi, which was our first long-form piece, it's about 45 minutes long, we wanted to explore what it was to put the viewer as essentially a part of the story. You are embodying a toy robot given to a kid, and you are part of the dramatic arc of the story. We have worked with various personalities. We work with Bill Clinton for his work with the Clinton Global Initiative, for his work in East Africa. We worked with Barack Obama for the centennial of the national parks in the United States, and then that led us to do another guided visit by Barack Obama himself to the White House. We worked with major directors like Wes Anderson, and we've done collaborations with NASA, Roscosmos, the European Space Agency, and SpaceX to do a series on space exploration. Lately, just released at Sundance is 2 projects, Marshall from Detroit, and the one I'm going to focus on in my presentation today. And one of the most exciting things is currently we have a camera on the International Space Station where we are shooting for the remainder of the year and for a project that will have about 2 hours of content. But the project I want to focus on today is called Traveling While Black. And Traveling While Black, again, at the studio we do believe that we have a moral responsibility to show the world good VR. It is a moral imperative. We cannot leave VR just in the hands of the large corporations where it will become essentially a new medium for advertising, for much more targeted and much more impactful advertising. But if that is the only future that there is in immersive stories, then we do believe that that is a very bleak future to be in. So Traveling While Black is really a cinematic VR experience that immerses the viewer in the long history of the restriction of movement for black people in America and the creation of safe spaces in those communities. The film takes you to Ben Chili's Bowl in Washington, D.C., and you share a series of intimate moments with a lot of the patrons as Ben Chili's Bowl. As they go and they take you, they tell you the stories of their experiences as they couldn't travel because their travel was restricted and how they were received in the various establishments across America. And this is a way to confront and talk about the race problem still in America, understanding if by using Ben's Chili's Bowl, who was there 60 years ago, by using the same location, by looking at the then and now to see if things have changed, so that we can not only remember the past, but also learn from it. And most importantly, facilitate a dialogue about the challenges that minorities still face today in America.
The Green Book was a guide for African Americans to travel safely, to find shelter, food, and gas in a time when these basic rights were not guaranteed.
Every trip through America for a black person during those times was potentially fatal. The assumption is at some time it stopped, and that's not the case. It never stopped.
I am feared, really frightened for black men traveling while black. I wonder, when does it end?
So the project was initiated by Roger Ross Williams, which is an African-American director, an Academy Award winner for documentary films. And he wanted to explore the difference between those years and today to see how the world had changed. We talk in a way about the past and the present, and we talk about the 60 years and the precedent that was created. We wanted to focus on real testimonies. We wanted to hear those difficult and dramatic stories of traveling around in America, but we didn't just want to be provocative. We wanted to be potentially or hopefully inspiring a healing sense and spark a feeling of connection between you and the people retelling you those experiences. We wanted to also weave in some lyrical moments of breathing between the testimonies. So the form that the piece takes is an alternation between a direct, very visceral testimony and an open space for reflection. So it's not something that is just simply thrown at you as something that we tell you, you must feel this right now. But that alternance or that alternation between the day and the night and the testimonies and the reflection enhances the emotional impact and the ability for the message to get to you, since it creates a space for you as the viewer to think and reflect. So the experiences that we tend to create at the studio, we don't like the term storytelling. We are not, cinema very much shows you exactly what you need to be looking at every point in time, and the thread to follow the story is a very clear and dictated one. And we believe that in an experiential medium, it is much more meaningful and much more powerful to actually facilitate the encounter between you as the viewer and a story. And we do believe that the chemistry that forms in that medium is actually as much as the viewer as it is from the story. So the contribution is 50-50. And that makes you share or makes you experience these testimonies in a very raw and visceral way. But if that was the only thing that was there in the piece, there wouldn't be space for you to engage your mind, to breathe and think about what it is. And so those are the moments that we filmed at night and between those emotional moments. And this is what we call the participatory approach to storytelling. Excuse me. The way we approach the projects at the very beginning is deeply interactive in all possible ways. It's interactive in the mindset. It's interactive in in the mindset that leads us to how to structure the story. The architecture and everything about our process is at its essence interactive. Even if in a project like this, the final result from a technical standpoint is not interactive. But it would be too easy to make just another provocative process about minority suffering. That would not be particularly useful for healing or to progress or to take steps ahead. And we do believe that VR and immersive storytelling or immersive narratives in general can take society in a direction of healing and in a direction of progress. It is not just pushing on the hurt, but it is creating the space to have a ritual. It's a place where you can come and heal together. And you can have that shamanistic healing. To do that, we actually developed not just the content, but again, the technologies. This was the first time in which we used our 4th generation camera very quickly. Again, this allowed us to film in a much more realistic and close to the characters way. And I hope you can see the piece. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, Sylwan. You may have a seat, please. We only have time for one question as before. Are there any questions from the audience? No questions. Okay. I want to ask you, what are the biggest challenges in immersive storytelling?
Well, you have to learn you first have to unlearn, in my case, 25 years of traditional storytelling in film. You have to walk that back and identify in all of the experience and in all of the intuition and sensitivity that you have built, what is useful and what is instead harmful to the new creative process in a new medium. It is a new medium, and so certain things will work or not work, but also will have a different meaning. Finding those neural pathways that connect, that make the audience connect to the story that you're introducing them to, is something that we cannot say that we are defining the language, we are exploring the language. And so the most important thing is actually being sensitive, taking yourself, your ego away from the process. It is very much more an exploratory process than a directive mandatory process from a director's standpoint.
Thank you very much, Sebastian Sylwan. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. Thank you so much. So if you found any tweetable moments in these 3 great talks, you can tweet them with the hashtag MCB19. Die nächste Session auf Bühne 6 ist The Golden Age of Podcasting mit US-Podcast-Pionier Joel Lovell und Tobias Baukhage. Wenn ihr Übersetzungsgeräte braucht, gibt es die da hinten bei dem Herren und vielen Dank für eure Aufmerksamkeit.